Sometimes the most life-changing moments come disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. And for Luis Guerrero, a struggling mechanic in Pleasant Valley, South Dakota, that moment arrived when a luxury sedan crashed through the guardrail and plunged into the community lake during his lunch break. Faced with an impossible choice between keeping his desperately needed job and saving a drowning stranger, Luis chose compassion over security. A decision that cost him everything he thought he had. What he didn't know was that the woman he pulled from that sinking car would return the very next day as Stephanie Reed, CEO of the region's most powerful construction empire, carrying an offer that would transform not just his life, but the entire community. This is the story of how one moment of courage turned a pink slip into a lifetime contract, proving that heroes aren't born in boardrooms but forged when ordinary people choose extraordinary courage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Barnes Auto Repair, where Luis Guerrero wiped grease from his weathered hands with a shop rag that had seen better days. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who understood engines better than people, his dark hair already showing threads of silver that spoke to years of worry and responsibility. The familiar scent of motor oil and rust hung heavy in the air, mixing with the distant aroma of coffee from Tony's diner across the street. "Luis, you got that transmission done yet?" Chester Barnes called from his cluttered office, his voice carrying the perpetual irritation of a man who measured everything in dollars and cents. The garage owner emerged, clipboard in hand, his thick glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. "Mrs. Henderson's been calling all morning about her Buick." Luis glanced at the ancient transmission spread across his workbench, its components laid out with surgical precision. Each gear and valve had been cleaned and inspected, a process that took time but guaranteed the job would be done right. "Give me another hour. The synchros were shot, had to order new ones from Sioux Falls." "An hour?" Chester's face reddened beneath his thinning gray hair. "You've been working on that thing for 3 days. Time is money, Guerrero." The familiar knot in Luis's stomach tightened. He'd heard this lecture countless times over the past 8 years, but it never got easier. Chester Barnes had inherited the garage from his father, a man who understood that quality work took time. The son, however, only understood profit margins and quick turnarounds. "I could slap it back together in 20 minutes, Luis said quietly, not looking up from his work. "But it'll be back here in a month, and you'll have to eat the warranty." "Work!" Chester snorted, making a note on his clipboard. "Maybe that's what we need to start doing. Quick fixes, cash up front, no warranties. Half the customers in this town can't afford proper repairs anyway." Luis's hands stilled on the transmission case. Through the open bay door, he could see Pleasant Valley's main street, where pickup trucks and aging sedans told the story of a community that had seen better days. The grain elevator that once brought prosperity stood silent against the prairie sky, its shadow falling across homes where families stretched every paycheck to make ends meet. "These people trust us," Luis said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "My neighbors, people I grew up with, they deserve better than quick fixes. Your neighbors don't pay your salary, I do." Chester's clipboard slapped against his thigh. "And speaking of salary, you missed another day last week. Dr. Walsh's appointment, wasn't it?" The mention of his mother's cardiologist hit Luis like a punch to the ribs. Isabella Guerrero's heart condition had worsened over the winter, requiring monthly checkups and medications that cost more than Luis made in a week. The insurance from Barnes Auto Repair covered basic visits, but the specialists and prescriptions drained every extra dollar he earned. "Mama's condition is serious," Luis said, choosing his words carefully. "Dr. Walsh says she needs to see a specialist in Rapid City. The medication costs alone—" Not my problem. Chester turned back toward his office, then paused. But it might become your problem if you keep taking time off. There's plenty of mechanics looking for work these days. The threat hung in the air like exhaust fumes, bitter and suffocating. Luis had heard rumors about Chester considering layoffs, whispers that had circulated through Pleasant Valley's small business community for months. The garage barely stayed afloat, competing with chain stores in Sioux Falls and online parts suppliers that offered cheaper alternatives to local service. Austin Price, Luis's closest friend and fellow mechanic, rolled out from beneath a Ford pickup on a creeper, his sandy hair matted with sweat. At 28, Austin possessed natural mechanical ability, but lacked the experience and patience that made Luis indispensable. He'd overheard the conversation, and his expression showed the same concern that gnawed at Luis's conscience daily. "Don't let him get to you," Austin said quietly, pulling himself to his feet. "You're the best mechanic in 3 counties. Chester knows it, even if he won't admit it." Luis appreciated the loyalty, but friendship didn't pay bills or buy heart. Medication. He'd been considering a second job, maybe weekend work at the grain elevator or evening shifts at the truck stop near the interstate. Anything to bridge the gap between what he earned and what his mother needed. The old rotary phone on Chester's desk rang with mechanical persistence, its shrill tone cutting through the garage's ambient noise. Through the glass partition, Luis watched Chester answer with his typical gruff greeting, then saw the man's expression shift from annoyance to interest. "Big job," Austin observed, noting the change as well. "Haven't seen him smile like that in months." Chester emerged from his office with an uncharacteristic spring in his step, clipboard forgotten as he approached Luis's workbench. That was Reed Construction. They're expanding their equipment yard, need a mechanic to service their fleet. Contract work, good money. Luis looked up from the transmission, intrigued despite himself. Reed Construction dominated the regional building market, their distinctive blue trucks visible on job sites from Pierre to the Nebraska border. A contract with them could mean steady work and decent pay, the kind of opportunity that might solve his financial struggles. "They specifically asked for you," Chester continued, his tone suggesting this fact annoyed him. "Word gets around about quality work, I guess." The compliment, backhanded as it was, surprised Luis. Chester rarely acknowledged his skills openly, preferring to focus on productivity metrics and time management. But Reed Construction's reputation for demanding excellence meant they wouldn't settle for substandard service. "What's the catch?" Luis asked, knowing Chester well enough to expect complications. "No catch. Good hourly rate, regular schedule, benefits package." Chester paused, his smile fading. "Problem is, I can't spare you for outside contracts, especially not with summer coming. Tourist season means more breakdowns, more emergency calls." Luis felt opportunity slipping through his fingers like sand. Reed Construction represented everything. He needed financial stability, professional respect, a chance to work on modern equipment instead of the aging vehicles that limped into Barnes Auto Repair. But Chester held all the cards, controlling Luis's schedule and by extension his future. "Maybe we could work something out," Luis suggested. "Evenings, weekends." "Not happening." Chester's tone brooked no argument. "You're here or you're not. Can't have my mechanics running off to chase better offers every time someone waves a few extra dollars." Austin stepped closer, his loyalty evident in the way he positioned himself beside Luis. The younger mechanic had witnessed years of Chester's increasingly unreasonable demands, watching his friend sacrifice personal opportunities for the sake of job security that seemed less secure with each passing month. "Luis has been here 8 years, Austin said carefully. "Never missed a deadline, never botched a job. Maybe it's time to show some appreciation." Chester's glasses reflected the harsh overhead lights as he turned his attention to Austin. "Maybe it's time you worried about your own performance instead of sticking your nose in other people's business." The confrontation escalated quickly, voices rising above the mechanical hum of the garage's equipment. Luis found himself caught between loyalty to his friend and the need to preserve his employment. Every word spoken felt like another nail in the coffin of his future, each moment of conflict pushing him further from the stability his mother's condition demanded. Enough! Luis's voice cut through the argument with quiet authority. Austin, get back to work. Chester, I'll finish Mrs. Henderson's transmission and have it ready by closing time. The temporary peace satisfied no one, but it restored the garage's working atmosphere. Chester retreated to his office, muttering about employee attitudes and respect for authority. Austin returned to his pickup truck, occasionally glancing toward Luis with expressions of concern and frustration. Luis buried himself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical work, finding solace in the precision required to rebuild a transmission properly. Each component had its place, its purpose, its relationship to the whole. Unlike human interactions, mechanical systems followed logical rules that rewarded patience and skill with predictable results. The morning passed slowly, marked by the steady progression of routine tasks. Luis completed an oil change on a farming family's sedan, noting the worn tires and suggesting a tire rotation that would extend their life by several thousand miles. He diagnosed a mysterious rattling sound in a teacher's compact car, discovering a loose exhaust shield that could be fixed with a simple clamp rather than expensive replacement parts. These small acts of honesty and care had built Luis's reputation throughout Pleasant Valley, earning him customer loyalty that transcended Chester's business practices. People requested Luis specifically, trusting his judgment and appreciating his refusal to recommend unnecessary repairs. As noon approached, the garage settled into its typical lunch-hour lull. Chester had left for his daily meal at Tony's Diner, where he would complain about employee attitudes and rising business costs to anyone willing to listen. Austin munched a sandwich while thumbing through an automotive magazine, occasionally sharing interesting articles about new diagnostic equipment or engine technologies. Luis unwrapped the ham sandwich Isabella had prepared that morning, her arthritic fingers still capable of creating meals that carried the warmth of maternal love. The bread was homemade, the ham sliced thin to stretch their grocery budget, but every bite reminded him of the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him after his father's death in a construction accident 20 years earlier. "You thinking about that Reed construction job?" Austin asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Luis nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Mama's medication costs keep going up. Dr. Walsh wants to try a new treatment, but the insurance won't cover it. Says it's experimental." "How experimental?" "Experimental enough to cost $300 a month." Austin whistled low, understanding the implications immediately. $300 represented nearly a week's wages after taxes and deductions, money that Luis didn't have, despite working overtime whenever Chester allowed it. "Maybe you should take the job," Austin suggested quietly. Chester's threats are just hot air. He can't replace you, not with your skills and customer base. Luis wanted to believe his friend's optimism, but experience had taught him caution. Chester might be many things, but he wasn't bluffing about the garage's financial situation. One major customer loss or equipment failure could force him to make painful decisions about staffing and services. The sound of screeching tires from the direction of Pleasant Valley Community Lake interrupted their conversation, followed by a crash that echoed across the water like thunder. Both men looked up from their lunches, listening for additional sounds that might indicate the severity of whatever had occurred. "Probably just kids hot rodding," Austin said, but his expression showed concern. The lake served as Pleasant Valley's primary recreation area, especially popular during lunch hours when people sought brief escapes from work routines. Luis stood, walking to the garage's open bay door where he could see the lake in the distance. Something was wrong. A plume of steam rose from the water near the far shore, and he could make out what looked like tire tracks leading to the guardrail. "Call 911, he told Austin, already reaching for his keys. "I'm going to check it out." Chester said to stay. "Here during lunch," Austin reminded him, but he was already moving toward the phone. Luis paused at the threshold between the garage and the outside world, between the security of following orders and the uncertainty of doing what felt right. In that moment, he thought of his mother's gentle voice, reminding him that some choices define who we become, not just what we do. The decision made itself. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Luis's boots hit the gravel parking lot of Barnes Auto Repair as he sprinted toward his weathered pickup truck, the sound of Austin's voice already talking rapidly to the 911 dispatcher fading behind him. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on Pleasant Valley's main street, creating waves of heat that distorted the air above the asphalt like liquid glass. His truck's engine turned over reluctantly, protesting the sudden demand for speed after, sitting idle in the afternoon heat. The short drive to Pleasant Valley Community Lake felt endless, each second stretching like pulled taffy as Luis navigated the familiar streets with growing urgency. Past Miller's hardware store with its faded red paint and hand-lettered signs advertising farm equipment, past the elementary school where children played on swings that had been installed when he was their age, past the post office where Mrs. Thompson had worked for 37 years and knew everyone's business before they did. The lake came into view as Luis crested the small hill that separated Pleasant Valley's residential area from its recreational district. What he saw made his blood run cold. A section of the metal guardrail that protected the scenic overlook had been completely destroyed, twisted metal jutting at odd angles like broken bones. Fresh tire tracks scored the grass leading to the water's edge, and approximately 50 yards from shore, the roof of a dark sedan protruded from the lake's surface like a metallic island. Luis parked his truck with tires skidding on loose gravel and ran toward the water's edge, his trained mechanic's eye automatically assessing the situation. The vehicle had hit the guardrail at considerable speed, probably hydroplaning on the rain-slicked road from yesterday's brief but intense thunderstorm. The angle of impact suggested the driver had lost control while navigating the curve, possibly distracted or experiencing a medical emergency. Steam continued to rise from the submerged engine compartment, creating an eerie fog that drifted across the lake's normally placid surface. The car was sinking slowly but steadily, its nose pointed downward at approximately 30 degrees. Luis estimated maybe 10 minutes before it would disappear completely beneath the surface, taking with it anyone trapped inside. "Hello?" he shouted across the water, cupping his hands around his mouth to project his voice. "Can anyone hear me?" For a moment, only the gentle lapping of waves against the shore answered him. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of someone pounding against glass from inside the vehicle. The rhythmic thumping was weak, growing weaker with each repetition, suggesting the occupant was either injured or running out of air. Luis kicked off his work boots without hesitation, the worn leather dropping onto the sandy beach with muffled thuds. His denim shirt followed, revealing arms scarred from years of working with hot metal and sharp edges. The water temperature shocked his system as he waded in, the lake still carrying winter's memory despite the warming spring weather. Swimming had never been Luis's strong suit, but desperation drove him forward with powerful strokes that ate up the distance between shore and the sinking car. The closer he got, the more details became visible through the water's surface. A woman sat trapped behind the steering wheel, her face pale with panic as she struggled against a seatbelt that had apparently jammed during the impact. The car's electrical system had failed, leaving the power windows inoperable and the doors locked tight. Luis took a deep breath and dove underwater, feeling for the door handles with hands that had spent years developing sensitivity to mechanical problems. The water pressure made opening the doors impossible, but the rear passenger window had cracked during the impact, creating a potential entry point. Surfacing for air, Luis saw that the woman inside had noticed his presence. Her mouth moved frantically, forming words he couldn't hear through the glass and water, but her eyes communicated everything he needed to know. Terror mixed with desperate hope. The look of someone who had accepted death but wasn't ready to surrender. Luis dove again, this time carrying a fist-sized rock he'd grabbed from the lake bottom. The underwater world was silent, except for the steady stream of bubbles escaping from the car's air pockets. He positioned himself carefully and struck the cracked rear window with the rock, feeling the safety glass spider web further but not break completely. 3 more strikes, each one requiring another trip to the surface for air, finally shattered the window completely. Luis cleared away the loose glass as best he could, then squeezed through the opening into the car's rear compartment. The water level inside had risen to the woman's waist, and her breathing came in short, panicked gasps as the available air. Space continued to shrink. "I'm going to get you out," Luis said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "What's your name?" "Stephanie," she managed, her voice hoarse from shouting. "Stephanie Reed." The seatbelt stuck, and my ankles caught under the pedal. Luis moved carefully through the rising water, feeling his way around the woman's position. The impact had crumpled the driver's side footwell, trapping her right ankle between twisted metal and the brake pedal assembly. The seatbelt mechanism had indeed jammed, probably due to the sudden deceleration during the crash. "I'm Luis," he said, working to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm a mechanic. I understand how these systems work. We're going to get you free." The water continued rising, now reaching Stephanie's chest and making her breathing even more labored. Luis used his pocket knife to cut through the seatbelt webbing, then turned his attention to her trapped ankle. The metal had bent in such a way that pulling would only cause more injury, but his mechanical knowledge suggested a different approach. Working by touch in the murky water, Luis located the brake pedal's pivot point and began working it back and forth, gradually loosening the grip on Stephanie's ankle. The process required patience they didn't have, but forcing it would risk breaking bones or causing severe lacerations. "Tell me about yourself," Luis said, trying to distract Stephanie from their deteriorating situation. "Keep talking. It'll help you stay calm." "I run a construction company," she gasped, water now lapping at her shoulders. "Reed Construction Group. We build commercial projects, schools, hospitals. I was driving back from a site inspection when I hit something slick. On the road, Luis recognized the company name immediately. Reed Construction's reputation extended throughout the region, known for quality work and fair treatment of employees. The irony wasn't lost on him that he might be saving the life of someone whose company had just offered him the job opportunity Chester refused to allow. "Almost got it," Luis said, feeling the brake pedal assembly give way slightly. "When I say go, you're going to push up and back with your leg while I pull. Ready?" The car shifted suddenly, its nose dropping another few degrees as more water flooded the engine compartment. They had maybe 3 minutes before the vehicle would be completely submerged, and Luis still needed to get both of them through that rear window and back to shore. "Go!" Stephanie's ankle came free with a grinding sound of metal against metal. Luis immediately wrapped his arm around her waist, supporting her weight as they moved toward the rear of the car. The water level had reached the ceiling in the front seats, but a small pocket of air remained in the back. Take the deepest breath you can, Luis instructed. We're going out through that rear window, then straight up to the surface. Stay with me, don't panic, and don't try to swim on your own. I've got you. Stephanie nodded, her face pale but determined. Luis could see the strength in her eyes, the same kind of inner steel that had built a successful business in a male-dominated industry. She wasn't going to give up easily. They went under together, Luis guiding Stephanie through the shattered window with one arm, while using the other to pull them both toward the surface. The car's final descent began just as they cleared the wreckage, the sedan disappearing into the lake's depths with a series of bubbles that marked its grave. The swim back to shore tested Luis's endurance to its limits. Stephanie, despite her injured ankle, helped as much as she could, but the cold water and shock were taking their toll on both of them. By the time they reached the sandy beach, Luis's muscles trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. The distant sound of sirens grew steadily louder as Pleasant Valley's volunteer fire department and ambulance service responded to Austin's 911 call. Luis helped Stephanie to a sitting position on the beach, both of them shivering despite the warm afternoon sun. "You saved my life," Stephanie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know your last name." "Guerrero," Luis replied, wringing water from his shirt. "Luis Guerrero. I work at Barnes Auto Repair in town." Stephanie studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. Even in her bedraggled state, she carried herself with an authority that spoke of years making difficult decisions and taking responsibility for their consequences. "Barnes Auto Repair," she repeated thoughtfully. "You're the mechanic Reed Construction asked for. Chester Barnes said you weren't available for contract work." Luis felt his stomach drop as the implications hit him. The woman he'd just risked his life to save was not only the CEO of Reed Construction, but also someone who knew exactly why he'd missed out on the job opportunity that could have solved his financial problems. "That's right," he said simply, not wanting to speak poorly of his employer despite the circumstances. The first fire truck arrived with lights flashing and sirens wailing, followed closely by an ambulance and Officer David Park's patrol car. The scene quickly transformed from quiet desperation to organized emergency response, with paramedics checking both Luis and Stephanie for injuries, while firefighters prepared to mark the submerged vehicle as a navigation hazard. "Sir, we need to check you out too," one of the paramedics insisted as Luis tried to deflect medical attention towards Stephanie. "Hypothermia, possible injuries from broken glass, stress response. You've been through a trauma." Luis reluctantly submitted to the examination, watching as Stephanie received more intensive medical care. Her ankle was swollen and possibly fractured, and she showed signs of mild hypothermia and shock. The paramedics recommended transport to Pleasant Valley General Hospital for thorough evaluation and treatment. "I'll need to contact my office," Stephanie said as they loaded her onto a stretcher. "And my insurance company about the car." "Ma'am, we'll handle all the paperwork," Officer Park assured her. "Right now, focus on getting medical attention. Mr. Guerrero here did good work today." As the ambulance pulled away with lights flashing, Luis found himself alone with Officer Park, both men watching the emergency vehicles disappear down Pleasant Valley's main street. The immediate crisis had passed, but Luis knew the real consequences were just beginning. "Hell of a thing you did," Officer Park said, making notes in his incident report. "Most people would have waited for professional rescue services." "She didn't have time to wait," Luis replied, pulling on his damp work shirt. "Sometimes you just do what needs doing." Officer Park nodded, understanding the mentality that drove people to act without considering personal risk. In small communities like Pleasant Valley, neighbors help neighbors without expecting recognition or reward. It was simply the way things were done. Luis's cell phone, miraculously still functioning despite its dunking in the lake, rang with Chester Barnes's distinctive ringtone. The reality of his situation came crashing back as he answered the call, knowing exactly what he would hear. "Where the hell are you?" Chester's voice crackled through the phone's waterlogged speaker. "You've been gone for over an hour, and I've got customers waiting." "There was an accident at the lake," Luis explained. "Someone went through the guardrail into the water. I helped with the rescue." "Not your job," Chester snapped. "Your job is here, working on cars, making money for this business. I don't pay you to play lifeguard." Luis closed his eyes, feeling the weight of inevitable consequences settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 8 years of loyalty, of quality work, of building customer relationships that kept Barnes Auto Repair profitable. None of it mattered in the face of Chester's narrow view of employee obligations. "I'll be back in 15 minutes, Luis said quietly. "Don't bother," Chester's voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Clean out your toolbox and pick up your final paycheck on Friday. I can't afford employees who think they're heroes." The line went dead, leaving Luis staring at his phone in the afternoon sunlight. Officer Park had overheard enough of the conversation to understand what had just happened, his expression showing the mix of sympathy and anger that decent people felt when witnessing injustice. "Sorry, Luis," Officer Park said simply. "Chester, Barnes is a fool if he lets you go." Luis nodded, unable to trust his voice for a moment. The full impact was just beginning to hit him. No job, no insurance, no way to pay for his mother's medication or the mortgage on their small house. He'd saved a stranger's life and lost everything that mattered to his own survival. "I need to get home," Luis said finally. "Mama will be worried when she hears about this." Officer Park offered him a ride, but Luis preferred to walk, needing time to process what had happened and figure out how to explain the situation to Isabella. The 2-mile walk through Pleasant Valley's familiar streets gave him space to think, to plan, to accept the reality of starting over at 34 with nothing but his skills and his conscience intact. He never noticed the black SUV that followed him at a discreet distance, its occupant making phone calls and taking notes as Luis made his way home to face an uncertain future. The wooden steps of the small house on Maple Street creaked under Luis's weight as he climbed toward the front door, each footfall echoing the heaviness in his chest. The modest 2-bedroom home had been in the Guerrero family for 3 generations, its white paint now faded to the color of old bones, and its foundation settling unevenly after decades of South Dakota winters. The front porch, where Isabella spent warm evenings watching neighbors walk their dogs and children ride bicycles, offered a view of Pleasant Valley's residential heart. Isabella Guerrero sat in her favorite wicker chair, her silver hair pulled back in the neat bun she'd worn for as long as Luis could remember. At 67, she retained the straight posture of a woman who had spent years bent over a sewing machine, creating alterations and repairs for half the town before arthritis forced her into retirement. Her dark eyes, so similar to her son's, missed nothing as Luis approached the house with his wet clothes and troubled expression. "Mijo, what happened to you?" she asked in Spanish, rising from her chair with the careful movements of someone whose heart required constant attention. "You look like you fell in the lake." "I did fall in the lake, Mama," Luis replied, switching to English as he always did when discussing serious matters. "There was an accident. A woman's car went into the water, and I helped pull her out." Isabella's weathered hands touched his damp shirt, her maternal instincts immediately assessing whether her son had been injured. The smell of her morning baking still lingered on her apron, a comforting aroma of cinnamon and flour that had defined Luis's childhood memories. Behind her, through the screen door, he could see the small living room where family photographs covered every available surface. "Are you hurt? Is she hurt?" Isabella's questions came rapidly, her concern extending naturally to the stranger her son had rescued. "Sit down. Let me get you dry clothes and something warm to drink." Luis allowed himself to be shepherded into the house, knowing that Isabella's need to care for others was as much a part of her nature as breathing. The living room felt smaller than it had during his childhood, but every piece of furniture held memories that connected him to his father's presence and his mother's strength. The ancient television set still worked, though its picture tube cast everything in slightly green tints. "The woman is fine," Luis said, accepting the towel Isabella brought from the linen closet. "They took her to the hospital for observation, but she'll recover completely." "Gracias a Dios," Isabella murmured, making the sign of the cross. "But you still haven't told me why you looked like someone stole your best dog." Luis had never been able to hide his emotions from his mother, a woman who had raised him alone after his father's death, and who understood his moods better than he understood them himself. He dried his hair roughly with the towel, buying time, before delivering news that would worry her more than his rescue heroics. "Chester fired me," he said simply. "I left work to help with the rescue, and he said I couldn't come back." Isabella's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, concern, and finally a steely determination that reminded Luis why she had survived decades of hardship as a single mother. She lowered herself into her reading chair, the one positioned to catch the best light from the front window. "After 8 years of faithful service," she said quietly. "After all the times you worked overtime without complaint, all the customers who asked for you specifically because they trusted your work. He warned me before," Luis admitted. "Said I took too much time off for your doctor appointments. Said there were plenty of mechanics looking for work." Isabella's jaw tightened in a way that would have made Chester Barnes reconsider his decision, if he'd been present to witness it. Despite her small stature and gentle demeanor, she possessed the fierce, protective instincts of a mother who had fought for everything her family owned. That man wouldn't know quality if it bit him on his skinny. "Behind," she said with uncharacteristic venom. "His father would be ashamed to see what he's done to that business." Luis smiled despite his circumstances, remembering the stories Isabella had told about old Peter Kowalski, Chester's father, who had built Barnes Auto Repair through honest work and fair dealing. The elder Kowalski had employed Luis's father briefly before the construction accident and had always treated the Guerrero family with respect. "What will you do now?" Isabella asked, her practical nature asserting itself over emotional outrage. "The mortgage payment is due next week, and my medications—" "I'll find something," Luis assured her, though he had no idea what that something might be. Pleasant Valley's job market was limited, and his specialized skills as a mechanic wouldn't translate easily to other available positions. "Maybe I can get work at the grain elevator or drive truck for one of the farming operations." Isabella studied her son's face with the intensity of someone reading a favorite book, seeing meanings that others might miss. After 67 years of life, most of it spent struggling against poverty and hardship, she had developed an ability to see through surface problems to underlying opportunities. "You did the right thing today," she said firmly. "Your father would be proud of you, and I'm proud of you. Sometimes doing right costs us in the short term, but God has a way of blessing those who help others." Before Luis could respond, a soft knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Through the screen, they could see a well-dressed woman in her 30s holding a manila envelope and looking somewhat uncertain about her mission. Luis didn't recognize her, but something about her professional appearance suggested she wasn't a neighbor dropping by for a social visit. "Mr. Guerrero?" the woman asked as Luis approached the door. "My name is Amanda Foster. I work for Reed Construction Group. Could I speak with you for a few minutes?" Luis exchanged glances with Isabella, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand that this unexpected visitor might be connected to the day's events. He opened the screen door and stepped onto the front porch, closing the main door behind him to give them privacy while keeping his mother close enough to call if needed. Amanda Foster appeared to be in her mid-30s with brown hair pulled back in a professional style and clothing that suggested both competence and significant salary. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to delivering important news, but her expression showed genuine concern rather than bureaucratic indifference. "Ms. Reed asked me to check on you," Amanda explained. "She's being kept overnight at the hospital for observation, but she wanted to make sure you didn't suffer any consequences for helping her." Luis felt heat rise in his cheeks as he understood the implication. Word of his termination had apparently spread quickly through Pleasant Valley's gossip network, reaching even the hospital where Stephanie Reed was recovering from her ordeal. "I appreciate the concern," Luis said carefully, "but what happened between me and my employer isn't Ms. Reed's responsibility." Amanda's smile suggested she'd expected this response and admired it. "Ms. Reed anticipated you might say that. She also anticipated that Chester Barnes might not fully appreciate having an employee who puts human life ahead of business profits." The sharp criticism of Chester was delivered matter-of-factly, without malice, but with the authority of someone who understood business management from a different perspective. Luis found himself curious about what Stephanie Reed might have learned about his situation during her brief time in Pleasant Valley. "She asked me to give you this," Amanda continued, extending the manila envelope, "and to tell you that Reed Construction Group would like to discuss employment opportunities with you at your earliest convenience." Luis accepted the envelope reluctantly, aware that charity disguised as opportunity could be more damaging to his pride than outright poverty. Inside, he found official letterhead and what appeared to be a formal job offer, though he didn't examine it closely while Amanda watched. "I don't want special treatment because of what happened today," he said. "If your company needs a mechanic, I'm qualified for the work. If you don't, I'm not interested in handouts." Amanda's expression shifted to something resembling respect, as if Luis had just passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. "Ms. Reed said you'd respond exactly that way. She also said to tell you that Reed Construction has been trying to hire you for months, long before today's accident." This revelation surprised Luis more than anything else that had happened during a day full of surprises. Reed Construction's interest in his services predated his rescue of their CEO, which meant any job offer was based on his professional reputation rather than gratitude or guilt. "She mentioned something about Chester Barnes refusing to let you work contract jobs," Amanda continued. "We've been hoping that situation might change, or that you might become available through other circumstances." The delicate phrasing didn't hide the fact that Reed Construction had been monitoring his employment situation, waiting for an opportunity to recruit him away from Barnes Auto Repair. The knowledge that a major company valued his skills enough to wait for him provided a boost to his battered self-confidence. "What kind of position?" Luis asked, allowing himself to consider possibilities he'd thought were beyond his reach. "Fleet Maintenance Supervisor," Amanda replied promptly. "We have over 200 vehicles and pieces of equipment spread across multiple job sites. You'd be responsible for maintaining operational readiness, managing repair schedules, and overseeing a team of mechanics." Luis felt his breath catch as he processed the scope of the opportunity being presented. Fleet Maintenance Supervisor was a management position, the kind of career advancement he'd dreamed about but never seriously pursued. The salary alone would solve his financial problems and provide the security his mother's condition required. "I'd need to think about it," he said, though every instinct told him to accept immediately. "Of course," Amanda agreed. "Ms. Reed will be released from the Hospital tomorrow morning. She'd like to meet with you personally to discuss the details, if you're interested. After Amanda departed, Luis returned to the living room, where Isabella waited with barely contained curiosity. He showed her the job offer, watching her eyes widen as she read the salary figure and benefit package description. "Mijo, this is 3 times what Chester was paying you," she said softly, "with health insurance that would cover my medications completely." Luis nodded, still struggling to process the rapid transformation of his circumstances. This morning, he'd been a struggling mechanic facing impossible choices between his job and his conscience. Tonight, he was considering a management position with one of the region's most successful companies. "It feels too good to be true," he admitted. "Like maybe they're offering this because they feel guilty about what happened." Isabella set the papers aside and took her son's hands in hers, her touch carrying the authority of a woman who had navigated life's challenges with wisdom earned through experience. "Luis, listen to me carefully," she said. "Good things don't happen to good people by accident. They happen because good people make choices that create opportunities for more good things. You saved that woman's life not because you expected a reward, but because it was right. Now she wants to reward you, not because she feels guilty, but because she recognizes your character." The simple logic of his mother's words cut through Luis's self-doubt like a sharp knife through tangled rope. Isabella had always possessed the ability to see truth clearly, uncluttered by the complications that confused others. "Your father always said that the hardest part of success isn't getting opportunities," she continued. "It's recognizing them when they come disguised as something else. This looks like charity to you, but it's really recognition of your worth." That evening, Luis sat on the front porch where Isabella usually spent her evenings, watching Pleasant Valley settle into nighttime routines. Porch lights flickered on along Maple Street. Families gathered for dinner in homes where the struggles might be different, but were no less real than his own. Tomorrow, he would meet with Stephanie Reed and make a decision that would change not only his life, but his understanding of how the world worked. The boy who had learned to fix broken things would discover whether he was ready to build something entirely new. The morning sun painted Pleasant Valley General Hospital's brick facade in warm amber tones as Luis adjusted his tie for the third time in the parking lot. He'd borrowed the tie from Father Antonio at St. Michael's Catholic Church, along with a pressed white shirt that almost fit properly. The navy blue slacks were his own, purchased 5 years ago for Isabella's retirement party and worn only for special occasions that rarely came. Inside the hospital's main lobby, the familiar antiseptic smell mixed with the aroma of coffee from the volunteer-operated gift shop. Luis had visited these halls countless times during Isabella's various treatments, but today felt different. Instead of worry about medical bills and prognoses, he carried a folder containing his employment history and references, prepared for a conversation that could reshape his future. Stephanie Reed occupied a private room on the second floor, her ankle elevated and wrapped in medical bandaging. Despite the hospital gown and IV line attached to her arm, she maintained the alert, bearing of someone accustomed to conducting business regardless of circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, and without makeup, she looked younger than Luis had initially estimated, though her eyes retained the sharp intelligence he'd noticed during their brief conversation at the lake. "Mr. Guerrero," she said, gesturing toward the visitor's chair beside her bed. "Thank you for coming. I hope Amanda didn't pressure you too much yesterday." "She was very professional," Luis replied, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair that had been designed. "More for economy than comfort, though I have to admit the offer surprised me." Stephanie smiled, the expression transforming her business-like demeanor into something more approachable. "I imagine it did. Most people don't expect their lives to change dramatically because they did the right thing at the right moment. Through the room's window, Luis could see Pleasant Valley's main street stretching toward the residential district where he'd grown up. The view reminded him of how small his world had been until yesterday, how limited his expectations had become after years of economic struggle. Amanda mentioned that your company had been interested in hiring me before the accident, Luis said. I'm curious about that. We've been expanding our operations throughout the region, Stephanie explained, adjusting her position carefully to accommodate the injured ankle. Quality fleet maintenance is crucial for meeting project deadlines and controlling costs. Your reputation for thorough, honest work reached us through several channels. She paused, studying Luis's face with the same intensity she'd probably used to evaluate countless business proposals. Frank Morrison, our current fleet supervisor, has been trying to recruit you for 8 months. He says you're the best diagnostic mechanic between Sioux Falls and Denver. Luis felt a flush of professional pride mixed with surprise. Frank Morrison was legendary in regional automotive circles, a master mechanic who'd built Reed Constructions. Maintenance program from scratch. Recognition from someone of Morrison's caliber meant more than any formal credential. I appreciate that, Luis said. But I have to ask, would this offer exist if I hadn't pulled you out of that lake? Stephanie's laugh was genuine, without the calculated quality that often marked successful executives. Probably not, though not for the reason you're thinking. Frank has been pushing me to make you an offer that Chester Barnes couldn't refuse. Yesterday's event simply gave us the opening we needed. She reached for a water glass on the bedside table, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her IV line. The truth is, we've been prepared to offer you this position for months. Your former employer's refusal to allow contract work simply meant we had to wait for circumstances to change. Luis processed this information, understanding that Reed Construction had been playing a longer game than he'd realized. The knowledge that his professional skills were valued enough to justify months of patient waiting provided a foundation of confidence he hadn't felt in years. Tell me about the position, he said, opening his folder to review the formal job. Description Amanda had provided. Fleet maintenance supervisor, Stephanie began, shifting into the presentation mode that had built her company's reputation for professionalism. You'd oversee mechanical operations for over 200 vehicles and pieces of equipment, trucks, excavators, cranes, generators, everything we use to complete construction projects. The scope of responsibility was staggering compared to his experience at Barnes Auto Repair, where a busy day might involve 6 or 7 vehicles. Luis tried to imagine coordinating maintenance schedules for an entire fleet while ensuring every piece of equipment remained operational. You'd have a team of 4 mechanics working under you, Stephanie continued, plus administrative support for scheduling and parts ordering. The position includes a company truck, full medical benefits, and performance bonuses tied to fleet. Availability percentages. Luis studied the salary figure again, still struggling to believe that such compensation was possible for someone with his background. The amount represented not just financial security, but genuine prosperity, the kind of income that would allow him to provide properly for Isabella while building savings for the first time in his adult life. The medical benefits alone would solve my biggest problem, Luis admitted. My mother has a heart condition that requires expensive medications. The insurance at Barnes Auto Repair barely covered basic treatment. Stephanie's expression softened with understanding. Amanda mentioned your mother's situation. Our medical plan includes full prescription coverage and access to specialists throughout the region. She could see a cardiologist in Sioux Falls or even Minneapolis if necessary. The offer kept improving beyond Luis's ability to find reasonable objections. Every concern he'd anticipated had been addressed. Every obstacle he'd expected had been removed. The opportunity felt almost too perfect, raising suspicions about hidden complications or unrealistic expectations. What's the catch? he asked bluntly. "This kind of position usually requires a college degree, management experience, certifications I don't have." Stephanie appreciated his directness, nodding as if she'd expected the question. "The catch is that you'd be learning on the job, making decisions without extensive corporate training. Frank Morrison would mentor you through the transition, but ultimately you'd be responsible for keeping our equipment operational across multiple states." She leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more serious. "Construction schedules don't allow for mechanical failures. If a crane breaks down during a critical lift, or a concrete truck fails during a pour, we lose not just time but credibility with clients. The person in this position literally holds our reputation in their hands." Luis understood the pressure such responsibility would create, but the challenge excited rather than intimidated him. After years of routine oil changes and brake jobs, the prospect of complex problem-solving and strategic planning appealed to his desire for professional growth. "When would I start?" he asked, the question committing him to serious consideration. "Of the offer, Monday, if you're interested," Stephanie replied. "Frank is eager to begin the transition process, and we have several large projects starting soon that will test our systems." The timeline was aggressive, allowing little time for second thoughts or gradual adjustment. Luis would essentially be jumping from small-town mechanic to regional fleet supervisor in a matter of days, a career leap that typically took years of incremental advancement. "I need to discuss this with my mother," Luis said, "and I'd like to meet Frank Morrison before making a final decision." "Of course," Stephanie agreed. "Frank is actually here in Pleasant Valley today, inspecting equipment at our Highway 14 project. If you have time this afternoon, he could show you some of what you'd be working with." Dr. Janet Walsh entered the room carrying a medical chart, her presence reminding Luis of the professional world that existed parallel to his own struggles. The cardiologist was Isabella's primary physician, someone Luis had met during numerous appointments and consultations about his mother's treatment. "Good morning, Mr. Guerrero," Dr. Walsh said, clearly surprised to find him in Stephanie's room. "I didn't realize you two knew each other." "We met yesterday," Stephanie explained diplomatically. "Mr. Guerrero was kind enough to help me after my accident." Dr. Walsh's eyebrows rose as she connected the details she'd probably heard through the hospital's information network. "You're the one who pulled her out of the lake. The nursing staff has been talking about it all morning." Luis felt uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on practical matters rather than yesterday's drama. "Dr. Walsh, you know my mother's condition better than anyone. If she had access to better medical coverage, what kind of treatment options might be available?" The physician's expression became thoughtful as she considered the implications of Luis's question. Isabella's heart condition could benefit significantly from newer medications and more frequent monitoring. The experimental treatments I've mentioned would also become viable options. "How much difference would that make?" Luis pressed, knowing that Isabella's future might depend on the decision he was about to make. "Potentially years," Dr. Walsh replied honestly. "The medications we're using now are effective but limited by cost considerations. Better coverage would allow us to optimize her treatment plan without financial constraints." After Dr. Walsh left to continue her rounds, Luis sat quietly for several minutes, processing the full implications of the choice before him. Accepting Stephanie's offer would solve immediate problems while creating new opportunities, but it would also mean leaving the familiar world of Pleasant Valley for the unknown challenges of corporate responsibility. "I can see you're weighing pros and cons," Stephanie observed. "That's exactly what I'd expect from someone Frank Morrison recommended. Good mechanics think through problems systematically before making decisions." Luis smiled at the comparison, recognizing the truth in her observation. Mechanics also know that sometimes you have to trust your judgment and move forward, even when you can't see all the variables. Is that what you're doing now? Luis thought about Isabella's words from the previous evening, about opportunities disguised as something else and the importance of recognizing them. He thought about his father's lessons about building things that lasted, and about the stranger, whose life he'd saved without expecting anything in return. I think so, he said finally. I'd like to meet Frank Morrison this afternoon and see what I'd be getting into. Stephanie's smile suggested he'd just passed another test he hadn't known he was taking. I'll call Frank and arrange a meeting. But Mr. Guerrero, I want you to understand something important about this offer. She adjusted herself in the hospital bed, her expression becoming serious. Reed Construction Group doesn't succeed by making emotional decisions or charity hires. We're offering you this position because we need someone with your skills and character. What happened yesterday simply gave us the opportunity we'd been waiting for. Luis left the hospital with Frank Morrison's phone number and a scheduled meeting for later that afternoon. As he walked through Pleasant Valley's familiar streets, he felt the weight of impending change settling around him like a coat that didn't quite fit yet, but might, with time and adjustment. The boy who had learned to fix broken things was about to discover whether he was ready to build something entirely new. Something that would require not just mechanical skills, but the courage to trust in possibilities. He'd never dared to imagine. The construction site on Highway 14 buzzed with purposeful activity as massive earth movers carved precise patterns in the prairie soil. Reed Construction's blue and white equipment dominated the landscape, creating what would eventually become Pleasant Valley's new community center and public library. The project represented the largest single investment in the town's infrastructure in over 2 decades, funded by a combination of state grants and private donations that Stephanie Reed had personally helped secure. Frank Morrison stood beside a massive excavator, his experienced hands running diagnostics on the machine's hydraulic system while explaining maintenance protocols to a younger mechanic. At 58, Morrison carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 4 decades solving mechanical problems under pressure. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who had earned his expertise through practical experience rather than classroom theory. Mr. Guerrero, Morrison called out as Luis approached, his voice carrying easily over the construction noise. Stephanie said you might be interested in joining our team. Luis shook Morrison's hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that marked experienced tradesmen. The introduction felt like the beginning of a job interview, but also like a master craftsman evaluating a potential apprentice. Morrison's reputation in the industry made his opinion crucial to Luis's decision-making process. I'm interested in learning more about what the position involves, Luis replied carefully. The scope seems significantly larger than anything I've handled before. Morrison smiled, appreciating Luis's honest assessment of the challenge. It is larger, but not necessarily more complicated. Good mechanics understand systems, whether they're working on a pickup truck or a piece of heavy equipment. The principles remain the same. He gestured toward the excavator beside them, its massive bulk representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in sophisticated machinery. This Caterpillar 336 has the same basic systems as any vehicle: engine, transmission, hydraulics, electrical. The scale is different, but the diagnostic approach is identical. Luis studied the machine with the trained eye of someone who had spent years identifying mechanical problems through visual inspection and intuitive understanding. The excavator's complexity was obvious, but Morrison was right about the fundamental. similarities to smaller vehicles. The real challenge, Morrison continued, isn't understanding individual machines. It's coordinating maintenance schedules across multiple job sites, while ensuring we never have critical equipment down when projects need it. He led Luis toward a mobile office trailer that served as the project's administrative center. Inside, charts and schedules covered every available wall space, creating a visual representation of the logistical complexity involved in managing a large construction fleet. Computer screens displayed real-time equipment locations and maintenance status, integrating technology with practical field management. We track over 200 pieces of equipment, Morrison explained, pointing to a large scheduling board. Everything from pickup trucks to tower cranes, spread across job sites in 4 states. Your job would be ensuring optimal availability while controlling maintenance costs. Luis examined the scheduling system, recognizing the careful balance required between preventive maintenance and operational demands. The work resembled what he'd done at Barnes Auto Repair, but multiplied by factors that transformed routine tasks into complex strategic planning. How do you predict equipment failures across such a large fleet? Luis asked, his curiosity overcoming initial intimidation. Morrison's expression showed approval at the question's sophistication. Experience, data analysis, and intuition. We maintain detailed records on every piece of equipment, operating hours, repair history, performance metrics. But ultimately, it comes down to understanding machines well enough to hear what they're telling you. The explanation resonated with Luis's approach to diagnostic work, where years of experience had taught him to identify problems through subtle changes in sound, vibration, or performance. The scale was larger, but the fundamental skill set remained. Applicable. Stephanie mentioned you diagnosed a transmission problem at Barnes Auto Repair by listening to gear changes, Morrison said. That kind of intuitive understanding can't be taught in technical schools. Either you have it or you don't. Luis felt a flush of professional pride, knowing that such recognition from Morrison carried significant weight in the industry. The older mechanic's reputation for identifying talent had helped build Reed Construction's maintenance program into a regional model for efficiency and reliability. I'd like to show you our main maintenance facility, Morrison continued, leading Luis back outside. It's about 15 minutes from here, just outside Pleasant Valley's city limits. The drive to Reed Construction's maintenance facility provided an opportunity for Luis to ask questions about the company's operations and culture. Morrison proved to be a thoughtful mentor, sharing insights about the transition from individual mechanical work to fleet management responsibilities. The hardest, but, Morrison explained as they drove past familiar Pleasant Valley landmarks, is learning to delegate effectively. You can't personally inspect every piece of equipment, so you need mechanics you trust to follow your standards and communicate problems clearly. The maintenance facility occupied a modern building complex that dwarfed Barnes Auto Repair in both size and sophistication. Multiple service bays accommodated everything from pickup trucks to bulldozers, while specialized equipment handled hydraulic testing, engine rebuilding, and electronic diagnostics. The facility represented a level of professional capability that Luis had only imagined. This is impressive, Luis said, walking through bays equipped with overhead cranes and computerized diagnostic systems. How many people work here? 12. Full-time mechanics plus administrative support, Morrison replied. During busy seasons, we bring in contractors for overflow work. Everyone specializes in particular equipment types, but cross-training ensures flexibility when needed. Luis met several of the mechanics during his tour, noting their professional demeanor and obvious competence. The work environment felt collaborative rather than competitive, with experienced technicians sharing knowledge and problem-solving approaches. The contrast with Chester Barnes's penny-pinching management style was immediately apparent. "What kind of training would I receive?" Louis asked as they concluded the facility tour. 6 weeks of intensive orientation, Morrison explained. Equipment familiarization, scheduling software, budget management, personnel supervision. I'd work with you directly for the first month, then gradually transfer responsibilities as you become comfortable with the scope. The training program sounded comprehensive but demanding, requiring Luis to absorb large amounts of information while learning entirely new aspects of business management. The challenge excited rather than intimidated him, representing the kind of professional growth he dreamed about but never actively pursued. After that, Morrison continued, you'd be responsible for maintaining fleet availability above 95% while staying within budget parameters. The performance bonuses Stephanie mentioned are tied directly to those metrics. Luis understood the pressure such expectations would create, but also recognized the opportunity for significant financial rewards. Success in the position would provide not just stable employment, but genuine prosperity. The kind of career advancement that could transform his family's economic circumstances permanently. They returned to Morrison's office, where detailed fleet reports covered his desk in organized stacks. The paperwork represented the administrative side of mechanical work that Luis had never encountered, but which would become a significant part of his new responsibilities. I have one more question, Luis said, settling into the chair Morrison indicated. Why me? There must be mechanics with more management experience, people with college degrees or advanced certifications. Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. I've been in this business for 40 years, Mr. Guerrero. I've worked with mechanics who had every certification available, but couldn't diagnose a simple engine problem. I've also worked with self-taught mechanics who could identify failures that stumped engineers. He gestured toward the facility visible through his office window. This operation succeeds because we hire people who understand machines intuitively, then teach them the business skills they need. Your reputation for thorough, honest work tells me you have the foundation we can build on. Luis felt the weight of Morrison's confidence settling on his shoulders like a comfortable burden. The older mechanic's endorsement carried more significance than any formal credential, representing recognition from someone whose judgment had been proven through decades of success. There's one more thing, Morrison said, opening a folder on his desk. Stephanie asked me to discuss the transition timeline with you. We'd prefer to start your training immediately, but we understand you might need time to arrange personal affairs. Luis thought about Isabella's medical appointments and the practical details of changing employment so dramatically. The transition would require careful coordination, but the urgency suggested that Reed Construction had immediate needs for his services. How soon could I start? Luis asked, surprising himself with the question's directness. Monday morning, if you're ready, Morrison replied. The spring construction season is beginning and we need full fleet capability to meet project deadlines. Every day of delay creates additional pressure on our systems. Luis nodded, understanding the business imperatives that drove such aggressive timelines. Construction companies lived and died by their ability to meet deadlines, and equipment failures could cascade into significant financial losses and reputation damage. I'd need this weekend to make arrangements, Luis said, his statement carrying the implication of acceptance. Notify my current employer, discuss the change with my mother, handle practical details. Morrison's smile suggested that Luis had just crossed an invisible threshold, moving from candidate to new employee through the simple act of discussing logistics rather than possibilities. Excellent, Morrison said, extending his hand for another firm handshake. Welcome to Reed Construction Group, Mr. Guerrero. I think you're going to find this work more rewarding than anything you've done before. As Luis drove home through Pleasant Valley's familiar streets, he felt the profound shift that marked major life transitions. The boy who had learned to fix broken things was about to discover whether he possessed the skills and courage necessary to build something entirely new. The evening ahead would require conversations with Isabella about changes that would affect both their lives. But for the first time in years, Luis felt genuine optimism about their future together. Friday morning arrived with the kind of bitter spring wind that reminded Pleasant Valley residents that winter hadn't completely surrendered its grip on the prairie. Luis stood outside Barnes' Auto Repair for what would be the last time as an employee, holding a cardboard box containing 8 years of accumulated personal items. His toolbox sat in the back of his pickup truck, its familiar weight representing both an ending and a beginning. Chester Barnes emerged from his office with Luis's final paycheck, his expression showing none of the remorse that might have been expected after firing a loyal employee. The garage owner had apparently convinced himself that Luis's termination was justified, a necessary business decision that protected the shop's interests against unreliable workers. "Paychecks calculated through yesterday," Chester said, handing over the envelope without making eye contact. "I deducted the cost of the shop uniform shirt you ruined in that lake stunt." Luis accepted the envelope without comment, knowing that arguing would accomplish nothing except prolonging an unpleasant encounter. The petty deduction was typical of Chester's character, a final demonstration of the small-minded thinking that had made working for him increasingly difficult. "You know, Luis," Chester continued, his tone carrying forced casualness, "I heard Reed Construction offered you some kind of job. That outfit's been struggling lately. Word is, they're overextended on several projects. Might be laying off workers. Before summer's over." The comment was intended to plant seeds of doubt about Luis's decision, but it had the opposite effect. Chester's need to undermine the opportunity revealed his own insecurity about losing a valuable employee to a competitor. The attempted manipulation confirmed that Luis was making the right choice. "I appreciate the concern," Luis replied diplomatically, loading his box into the truck's passenger seat, "but I've made my decision." Austin Price appeared from beneath the Ford pickup he'd been working on, his face showing the mixture of congratulations and loss that marked the end of a long friendship. The two men had worked side by side for 4 years, sharing the frustrations and small victories that defined life at Barnes Auto Repair. "Going to miss having you around," Austin said, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. "Place won't be the same without someone who actually knows what they're doing." Luis smiled at his friend's loyalty, knowing that Austin would bear the brunt of Chester's increased demands once the shop's most experienced mechanic was gone. The younger man's skills were solid but still developing, lacking the intuitive understanding that only came through years of diverse experience. "You'll do fine," Luis assured him. "Keep learning, keep asking questions, and don't let Chester pressure you into cutting corners. Your reputation is worth more than his convenience." Chester snorted at the advice, his displeasure evident at having his management methods criticized even indirectly. "Austin doesn't need career advice from someone who abandoned his responsibilities. To play hero," he said sharply. The insult hung in the air like exhaust fumes, bitter and unnecessary. Luis felt his temper flare but controlled it, remembering Isabella's advice about maintaining dignity in difficult situations. Responding to Chester's pettiness would accomplish nothing except lowering himself to the same level. "Good luck, Austin," Luis said, shaking his friend's hand firmly. "Call me if you need anything." As Luis drove away from Barnes Auto Repair, he felt the weight of transition settling around him like a familiar coat. The familiar streets of Pleasant Valley looked different somehow, as if he were seeing them through the eyes of someone whose circumstances had fundamentally changed. The shabby garage in his rearview mirror represented a chapter of his life that was definitively closed. Isabella waited on the front porch of their Maple Street home. her silver hair catching the morning sunlight as she watched her son park his truck in their small driveway. At 67, she possessed the kind of intuitive understanding that allowed her to read Luis's moods better than he understood them himself. "How did it go with Chester?" she asked as Luis climbed the wooden steps with his cardboard box. "About as well as expected," Luis replied, setting the box down on the porch beside Isabella's favorite chair. "He made some comments about Reed Construction having financial problems, but I think he was just trying to make me doubt my decision." Isabella's expression hardened with the protective anger that mothers felt when their children were threatened, even by something as petty as an employer's spite. "That man wouldn't recognize opportunity if it knocked him down and introduced itself," she said firmly. Luis laughed despite the morning's unpleasantness, appreciating his mother's fierce loyalty and colorful way of expressing displeasure. Isabella's support had been the constant factor that allowed him to navigate 8 years of Chester's increasingly difficult management. "Dr. Walsh called while you were gone," Isabella continued, her tone shifting to more serious matters. "She wants to schedule an appointment next week to discuss the new treatment options that would be available with better insurance coverage." The reminder of his mother's medical needs reinforced Luis's confidence in accepting Reed Construction's offer. Isabella's heart condition required ongoing management that had been limited by financial constraints, but the new position's comprehensive benefits would eliminate those barriers to proper care. "We'll schedule it for Tuesday," Luis said. "I start my new job on Monday, but the afternoon should be free for appointments." Isabella studied her son's face with the intensity of someone reading a favorite book, seeing meanings that others might miss. After raising Luis alone following his father's death, she had developed an ability to sense his emotional state through subtle changes in expression and posture. "You're nervous about starting over," she observed gently. "That's natural. Big changes always feel overwhelming at first." Luis nodded, appreciating his mother's understanding. The transition from small-town mechanic to fleet maintenance supervisor represented more than just a job change. It was a complete transformation of his professional identity and social position within the community. "I keep thinking about all the things I don't know," Luis admitted. "Management skills, computer systems, coordinating multiple locations. What if I'm not ready for this level of responsibility?" Isabella reached over and took her son's hand in hers, her touch carrying the warmth of maternal love and the authority of someone who had survived decades of challenges through determination and faith. "Micho, listen to me carefully," she said in Spanish, then switched back to English for emphasis. "Your father used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. You have everything necessary to succeed in this new position." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a Reed Construction pickup truck, its distinctive blue and white paint scheme immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the company's extensive operations throughout the region. Frank Morrison climbed out of the driver's seat, carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone with important business to discuss. "Mr. Guerrero," Morrison called out as he approached the front porch, "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to discuss a few details about Monday's orientation before the weekend." Luis introduced Morrison to Isabella, watching with amusement, as his mother immediately shifted into hostess mode, despite having no advance notice of the visit. She insisted on bringing coffee and homemade cookies, treating Morrison with the courtesy she extended to all guests, regardless of their business with her son. "Mrs. Guerrero, your son is about to become a very important person in our organization," Morrison said, accepting the coffee with genuine appreciation. "I wanted to make sure he understands exactly what he's getting into before Monday morning." Morrison opened his folder and spread several documents across the small porch table, creating An impromptu briefing session in the morning sunlight. The papers included organizational charts, equipment inventories, and project schedules that illustrated the scope of Luis's upcoming responsibilities. "These are our current active projects," Morrison explained, pointing to a map marked with colored pins. 18 major construction sites across 4 states, each requiring specific equipment and maintenance support. Your job will be ensuring optimal availability while coordinating with project managers and site supervisors. Luis studied the map, trying to comprehend the geographic scope of his new responsibilities. The scale was staggering compared to his experience at Barnes Auto Repair, where service calls rarely extended beyond Pleasant Valley's city limits. "How do you manage coordination across such distances?" Luis asked, his practical mind immediately focusing on logistical challenges, communication systems, regional maintenance hubs, and trusted personnel who can make decisions without constant supervision, Morrison replied. "We'll train you on all the systems, but ultimately, success depends on your ability to think strategically while maintaining attention to detail." Isabella listened to the conversation with the sharp attention of someone who understood that her son's future was being discussed. Despite having no background in construction or fleet management, she grasped the significance of the opportunity being offered and the challenges it would present. "What kind of support will Luis have during the transition?" she asked, her maternal concern evident in the question's directness. Morrison's expression showed respect for Isabella's protective instincts and practical approach to evaluating the situation. "Complete support, Mrs. Guerrero. I'll work with him personally for the first month, and our administrative staff will handle scheduling and paperwork until he's comfortable with those systems." He turned back to Luis, his tone becoming more serious. "But I won't lie to you about the pressure. Construction schedules don't allow for learning curves or mistakes. Equipment failures can cost thousands of dollars per day and damage relationships with clients we've spent years building." Luis appreciated Morrison's honesty about the position's demands, knowing that false reassurances would only create problems later. The challenge was significant, but the opportunity for professional growth and financial security made the risk worthwhile. "I understand," Luis said. "I'm ready to start Monday morning." Morrison smiled, pleased with Luis's commitment and confidence. "Excellent. One more thing. Stephanie wants to meet with you briefly on Monday afternoon, after your first day of orientation. She likes to check in personally with new supervisors." After Morrison departed, Luis and Isabella sat quietly on the front porch, processing the morning's events and contemplating the changes that would begin in just 3 days. The familiar rhythm of Pleasant Valley's daily life continued around them, but everything felt different somehow, charged with possibility and transformation. "Your father would be so proud," Isabella said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "He always believed you were capable of more than fixing other people's broken cars." Luis thought about his father's lessons regarding hard work, integrity, and the importance of building things that lasted. The new position at Reed Construction would allow him to apply those principles on a scale that could benefit entire communities, creating infrastructure that would serve future generations. Sunday evening found Luis organizing his thoughts and preparing mentally for Monday's challenges, knowing that the boy who had learned to fix broken things was about to discover whether he possessed the vision and courage necessary to build something entirely new. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often followed South Dakota's spring storms, the air washed clean and filled with the promise of new beginnings. Luis stood before the bathroom mirror in his rented apartment above Martinez Grocery, adjusting a tie that still felt foreign around his neck. The reflection staring back showed a man transformed, pressed shirt, polished shoes, and an expression that mixed determination with barely controlled nervousness. The Reed Construction Group headquarters occupied a modern glass building on the outskirts of Pleasant Valley, its architecture representing the kind of success that Luis had only observed from a distance. The parking lot contained vehicles that cost more than he'd earned in entire years at Barnes Auto Repair, but this morning he belonged here as much as anyone else pulling into the employee spaces. Frank Morrison waited in the lobby, his greeting warm but businesslike, as befitted the first day of Luis's new career. The older mechanic had clearly arrived early to ensure a smooth introduction, understanding that first impressions would be crucial for establishing Luis's credibility with the existing maintenance team. "Ready for the deep dive?" Morrison asked, leading Luis toward the elevator that would carry them to the third-floor administrative offices. "We've got a full day of orientation ahead, but I want to start by showing you the nerve center of our operation." The elevator's smooth ascent felt symbolic of Luis's rapid career advancement, carrying him from the familiar world of ground-level mechanical work to the executive realm where strategic decisions shaped entire companies. Through the glass walls, Pleasant Valley spread out below them like a detailed map, showing the community from an entirely new perspective. Morrison's office occupied a corner position that provided views of both the town and the construction site where Luis had first encountered Reed Construction's impressive equipment. The space was organized with military precision, walls covered with schedules and performance charts that tracked every aspect of the fleet management operation. "These boards represent our entire operation," Morrison explained, gesturing toward displays that resembled mission control centers. Equipment locations, maintenance schedules, project deadlines, budget allocations, everything you need to make informed decisions about resource allocation and priority management. Luis studied the complex information systems, recognizing the sophisticated planning required to coordinate such extensive operations. The scale was overwhelming, but the underlying logic was similar to the mental organization he'd developed. For managing multiple repair projects at Barnes Auto Repair, the computer system integrates all this data, Morrison continued, settling behind his desk while Luis examined the displays. But the real skill is knowing when the numbers don't tell. The complete story, when experience and intuition need to override what the spreadsheets suggest. A knock at the office door interrupted the orientation session, revealing a woman in her 30s wearing the kind of practical clothing that suggested hands-on involvement in construction operations. Her confident bearing and the respect in Morrison's greeting immediately identified her as someone important within the organization. "Luis, meet Sarah Martinez, our project coordination supervisor," Morrison said. "Sarah manages the interface between equipment scheduling and project requirements, which means you two will be working closely together." Sarah's handshake was firm, her assessment of Luis direct but not unfriendly. "Frank's told me good things about your diagnostic abilities," she said. "We've been looking forward to having someone who can predict problems before they become crises." The comment revealed the kind of proactive approach that separated successful operations from those that merely reacted to problems. Luis understood that his reputation for anticipating mechanical failures had been a key factor in Reed Construction's interest in hiring him. "I'm looking forward to learning how everything fits together," Luis replied. "The scope is much larger than anything I've handled before, but the principles seem consistent with what I know." Sarah smiled at his thoughtful response. "That's exactly the right attitude. We'll start you on smaller coordination tasks and gradually expand your responsibilities as you become comfortable with our systems." The morning progressed through intensive briefings on equipment tracking software, maintenance scheduling protocols, and budget management procedures, Luis found himself absorbing information at a pace that surprised him, his mechanical background providing a foundation that made the business concepts more accessible than he'd expected. "Time for the field portion of your education," Morrison announced after lunch, leading Luis toward the parking area where a Reed construction pickup truck waited. "You need to see how our operation works at the project level, where your decisions will have immediate practical consequences." The drive to the Highway 14 construction site provided an opportunity for Morrison to share insights about managing personnel and handling the political aspects of corporate operations. Luis learned that technical competence was only part of the job. Success also required diplomatic skills for dealing with project managers, site supervisors, and equipment operators who had their own priorities and pressures. "The hardest part of this job," Morrison explained as they approached the active construction zone, "is balancing competing demands for limited resources. Everyone thinks their project is most important, and they're usually right from their perspective." The construction site buzzed with controlled chaos as dozens of workers operated sophisticated equipment in carefully choreographed patterns. Luis recognized several of the machines from his previous visit, but now he saw them as part of an integrated system rather than individual pieces of equipment. Steve Patterson, the project foreman, greeted Morrison with the kind of professional respect that indicated their successful working relationship. Patterson was a weathered man in his 40s whose sunburned face showed decades of outdoor construction work and whose manner suggested competence earned through experience rather than classroom training. "Frank, good timing," Patterson said, gesturing toward a massive excavator that sat motionless beside a partially completed foundation. "The 336 started making noise yesterday afternoon. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me nervous about pushing it through the concrete pour scheduled for tomorrow." Morrison immediately shifted into diagnostic mode, his experienced ear detecting subtleties that less experienced mechanics might miss. He guided Luis through the evaluation process, demonstrating the systematic approach that had made him invaluable. "To read construction's operations, what do you hear?" Morrison asked Luis after they'd listened to the excavator's engine for several minutes. Luis concentrated on the machine's rhythmic sounds, applying the same intuitive analysis he'd used countless times at Barnes Auto Repair. "The timing seems slightly off," he said carefully. "Not enough to cause immediate failure, but probably indicates developing problems with the fuel injection system." Morrison's smile showed approval at Luis's accurate assessment. "Exactly right. The question now is whether to schedule immediate repairs or monitor the situation until the concrete pour is completed." The decision carried significant implications for both project schedules and equipment costs. Immediate repairs would delay tomorrow's concrete pour, potentially affecting the entire project timeline, but waiting risked catastrophic failure during a critical operation, which would create much larger problems. "What's your recommendation?" Patterson asked Luis directly, testing the new fleet supervisor's judgment under pressure. Luis considered the various factors: equipment age, repair, history, project priorities, and the potential consequences of different choices. The decision required balancing technical knowledge with business considerations, exactly the kind of strategic thinking his new position would demand regularly. "I'd recommend completing tomorrow's pour with close monitoring," Luis said finally. "The engine will hold together for another day, but we should schedule repairs immediately afterward to prevent more serious problems." Patterson nodded approvingly at the practical solution, while Morrison's expression showed satisfaction with Luis's reasoning process. The recommendation demonstrated understanding of both mechanical realities and business priorities. Exactly the kind of balanced judgment Reed Construction needed in their fleet supervisor. "Good call," Morrison said as they walked back toward their truck. "You're thinking like a manager, not just a mechanic. That's the mental transition that determines success in this position." The afternoon continued with visits to 2 additional project sites, each presenting different challenges that illustrated the complexity of coordinating equipment across multiple locations. Luis began to understand the 3-dimensional chess game that Morrison played daily, moving resources between projects while anticipating future needs and potential problems. As they returned to Reed Construction headquarters, Luis felt the satisfying exhaustion that came from intensive learning experiences. His brain buzzed with new information and concepts, but he felt confident about his ability to master the challenges ahead. "One more stop before we call it a day," Morrison said, parking in front of the main building. "Stephanie wants to meet with you briefly, check on how your first day went." Stephanie Reed's office occupied the top floor of the building, its expansive windows offering panoramic views of the surrounding countryside. Despite being back at work only days after her accident, she appeared fully recovered and engaged. Her attention focused completely on Luis as he entered her domain. "How was your first day?" she asked, gesturing for Luis to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table. "Frank says you're adapting well to the scope and complexity." "It's challenging but manageable," Luis replied honestly. "The scale is much larger than anything I've handled before, but the underlying principles are familiar." Stephanie studied his face with the same intensity she'd shown during their hospital conversation, evaluating not just his words, but his confidence level and emotional state. Her business success had been built partly on her ability to read people accurately and quickly. "Frank also mentioned that you made a good field decision about the excavator at the Highway 14 site," she continued. "Balancing technical concerns with project requirements is exactly the kind of judgment we need in this position." Luis felt a surge of professional pride at the recognition, understanding that he'd passed an important test during his first day. The approval of both Morrison and Stephanie suggested that his transition to management responsibilities was proceeding successfully. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Stephanie said, her tone becoming more serious. "Reed Construction Group is growing rapidly, and we are considering establishing a regional maintenance division that would service other construction companies in addition to our own fleet." The revelation opened possibilities that Luis hadn't considered, suggesting that his new position might be just the beginning of even greater opportunities. The concept of expanding beyond Reed Construction's internal needs would create challenges and rewards on an entirely different scale. "Your role would evolve into managing that expanded operation," Stephanie continued. "But first, we need to see how you handle our current fleet management responsibilities." Luis understood that he was being offered a vision of potential future advancement, contingent on his success in the immediate challenges ahead. The prospect excited him while reinforcing the importance of proving himself worthy of such trust and responsibility. As Luis drove home through Pleasant Valley's familiar streets, he reflected on a day that had exceeded his most optimistic expectations. The boy who had learned to fix broken things was discovering that he possessed not only the technical skills necessary for fleet management, but also the strategic thinking required for business leadership. The evening ahead would bring conversations with Isabella about his first day's successes and challenges, but for the first time in years, Luis felt genuinely optimistic about their shared future and his ability to provide the security and opportunities his mother deserved. 3 months into his tenure as fleet maintenance supervisor, Luis had established a routine that balanced the demands of his expanded responsibilities with the personal priorities that anchored his life in Pleasant Valley. The early morning hours found him reviewing overnight equipment reports in his home office, a converted bedroom where Isabella's sewing machine had once occupied the corner, now filled with computer equipment and project schedules. The transformation of their small house reflected the broader changes in their lives. Isabella's new medication regimen, covered completely by Reed Construction's comprehensive health insurance, had stabilized her heart condition to the point where Dr. Walsh spoke optimistically about long-term prognosis. The financial pressure that had dominated their existence for years had been replaced by genuine security and the luxury of planning for the future. The Hendersons called yesterday, Isabella mentioned over breakfast, referring to their elderly neighbors who lived in the house directly across Maple Street. Their grandson is graduating from technical college next month, looking for work as a mechanic. I told them you might have some advice about opportunities. Luis smiled at his mother's gentle way of suggesting he help others navigate career challenges, similar to those he'd recently overcome. Isabella's natural inclination toward community service had been constrained by their economic struggles, but improved circumstances had allowed her generous nature to flourish again. Tell them to have him call me, Luis replied, spreading strawberry jam on toast that Isabella had made from scratch. Reed Construction is always looking for good mechanics, and we've got several expansion projects that will require additional personnel. The mention of expansion projects wasn't idle conversation. Over the past month, Luis had been working with Stephanie Reed and Frank Morrison to develop proposals for the regional maintenance division that Stephanie had mentioned during his first day. The concept had evolved from theoretical possibility to concrete business plan, with Luis playing an increasingly central role in its development. His cell phone buzzed with the familiar sound of equipment alerts, the digital monitoring system that kept him connected to Reed Construction's entire fleet, regardless of his physical location. The display showed a hydraulic pressure warning from a bulldozer working on a school construction project in Sioux Falls, 60 miles northeast of Pleasant Valley. Problems? Isabella asked, recognizing the focused expression that appeared whenever. Luis shifted into troubleshooting mode. Minor issue with the D8 at the Sioux Falls job, Luis replied, already calculating response options. Hydraulic pressure dropping gradually, which usually means a developing leak rather than catastrophic. Failure. The diagnostic process that had once required physical presence at Barnes Auto Repair now involved coordinating resources across multiple locations. Luis called the project site to discuss symptoms with the equipment operator, then contacted the nearest Reed Construction maintenance facility to arrange for a technician and replacement parts. Can you handle it remotely? The site supervisor asked during their phone conversation. We're scheduled to start foundation excavation this afternoon, and the D8 is critical for meeting our deadline. Luis reviewed the machine's maintenance history on his laptop while continuing the conversation, noting recent repairs and scheduled service intervals. The data suggested that a hydraulic hose replacement would resolve the problem, but the timing required careful coordination to avoid project delays. I can have a tech there within 2 hours with replacement hoses, Luis assured him. The repair shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, and you'll be operational well before your afternoon deadline. The conversation concluded with scheduling, details and contingency plans, representing the kind of multi-location problem-solving that had become routine in Luis's expanded role. The challenge was more complex than anything he'd handled at Barnes Auto Repair, but the resources available through Reed Construction made solutions achievable rather than overwhelming. Frank Morrison called as Luis finished coordinating the Sioux Falls repair, his voice carrying the enthusiasm that marked significant developments in their ongoing projects. Luis, can you meet me at the main facility in an hour? Morrison asked. Stephanie wants to review the regional division proposal with both of us present. I think we're closer to implementation than we'd originally anticipated. The request sent a surge of anticipation through Luis's chest. The regional maintenance division represented his vision for expanding beyond Reed Construction's internal needs to serve other companies throughout the area. Success would establish him as a regional leader in fleet management while creating opportunities for other skilled mechanics seeking career advancement. "I'll be there," Luis confirmed, already planning his morning to accommodate the meeting. Isabella watched her son prepare for what was clearly an important business discussion, her expression showing the mixture of pride and amazement that had become common since Luis's dramatic career change. The transformation from struggling mechanic to corporate executive still seemed almost magical to both of them. "Will you be home for dinner?" she asked, the question carrying implications about the significance of the day's meetings. "Depends on how the discussions go," Luis replied, kissing his mother's forehead in the gesture of affection that had marked their relationship since his childhood. "But I'll call you as soon as I know something definitive." The drive to Reed Construction headquarters provided time for Luis to review his notes and mentally rehearse key points about the regional division proposal. The concept involved establishing satellite maintenance facilities in 3 additional cities, each serving a cluster of construction companies that lacked adequate fleet management resources. Morrison waited in the conference room adjacent to Stephanie's office, surrounded by charts and financial projections that illustrated the business case for expansion. The older mechanic's excitement was evident in his animated gestures as he explained various aspects of the proposal to Stephanie and 2 other executives Luis didn't recognize. "Luis, perfect timing," Stephanie said, gesturing for him to join. The group around the conference table. "Frank's been explaining how the regional concept would work operationally. I'd like you to walk us through the implementation timeline." Luis felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that accompanied high-stakes presentations, but his confidence had grown significantly over the past 3 months. The technical aspects of fleet management no longer intimidated him, and his understanding of business operations had expanded through daily experience with budget management and strategic planning. Phase 1 would involve establishing our primary satellite facility in Rapid City, Luis began, using a map to illustrate geographic coverage areas. The location provides access to construction projects throughout western South Dakota and parts of Wyoming and Nebraska. The executives followed his presentation attentively, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated their serious consideration of the proposal. Luis had learned to anticipate such inquiries, preparing detailed responses that addressed both operational and financial concerns. "What about staffing for the satellite facilities?" asked Richard Blackwell, Reed Construction's vice president of operations. "Qualified mechanics are scarce in rural areas, and training costs could significantly impact profitability projections." Luis had anticipated this challenge, developing a recruitment strategy that drew on his understanding of the regional employment market. "We'd partner with technical colleges to identify promising graduates, then provide advanced training through a main facility. The combination of guaranteed employment and career advancement opportunities should attract quality candidates." Stephanie nodded approvingly at the thoughtful response, her expression suggesting that Luis had addressed a key concern that could have derailed the entire proposal. The ability to attract and retain skilled personnel was crucial for any service-based business expansion. "The financial projections look strong," Stephanie said, reviewing spreadsheets that Morrison had prepared. "Break even within 18 months, significant profitability by year 3. The market demand is definitely there, based on our preliminary surveys." Luis felt his heart rate accelerate as the discussion moved toward implementation decisions rather than theoretical possibilities. The regional maintenance division was transitioning from ambitious dream to concrete reality, with his career advancement directly tied to its success or failure. "I want to authorize a detailed feasibility study," Stephanie announced, her decision carrying the weight of significant financial commitment. "Luis, you'd be responsible for site selection, staffing plans, and operational procedures. Frank would provide oversight and technical guidance during the startup phase. The assignment represented a quantum leap in responsibility and professional recognition. Luis would essentially be building a new business division from scratch, making decisions that could affect dozens of employees and multiple construction companies throughout the region." "I'm ready to take on that challenge," Luis said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what was being offered. "I've already identified potential locations in Rapid City and preliminary contacts with technical schools for recruitment purposes." Morrison's smile showed paternal pride in his protégé's rapid development from individual mechanic to business leader. The older man's mentoring had been crucial in Luis's successful transition, but now Luis was demonstrating the independent judgment necessary for major management responsibilities. "Excellent," Stephanie said, gathering the proposal documents. "I'll want weekly progress reports and a final recommendation within 60 days. If the feasibility study supports expansion, we'll move to full implementation by the end of summer." After the meeting concluded, Luis drove through Pleasant Valley with a sense of accomplishment that exceeded anything he'd experienced in his previous career. The regional maintenance division represented not just personal advancement, but the opportunity to create jobs and opportunities for other skilled workers throughout the area. His cell phone rang as he passed the location where Barnes Auto Repair had once operated. Chester Barnes had closed the business 2 months earlier, unable to compete effectively after losing his most experienced mechanic and several major customers who had followed Luis to Reed Construction's service offerings. "Luis, it's Austin." "Price," the familiar voice said. "I heard about Chester closing the shop. I'm looking for work, wondered if Reed Construction might have any openings for mechanics." Luis smiled at the cosmic justice of his former colleague seeking employment with the company that had transformed his own circumstances. Austin was a competent mechanic whose skills would be valuable to Reed Construction's expanding operations. "Austin, perfect timing," Luis replied. "We're planning a major expansion that will require experienced mechanics in supervisory roles. Can you meet me tomorrow morning to discuss opportunities?" The conversation continued for several minutes, with Luis outlining the regional division concept and Austin's potential role in its development. The prospect of working together again appealed to both men, representing continuity with their shared professional history while embracing new possibilities. That evening, Luis sat on the front porch with Isabella, watching Pleasant Valley settle into its familiar evening routines. The financial pressures that had once dominated their conversations had been replaced by discussions of opportunity and possibility, of dreams that were becoming achievable rather than merely wishful thinking. "Your father would be amazed to see what you've accomplished," Isabella said softly, her voice carrying the contentment that came from witnessing her son's success. "From fixing cars to building businesses, it's more than we ever imagined possible." Luis thought about the journey that had brought him from Chester Barnes's cramped garage to corporate conference rooms, where his opinions shaped significant business decisions. The transformation had required courage, hard work, and the willingness to recognize opportunities when they appeared in unexpected forms. "It all started with doing the right thing," he reflected, remembering the moment when he'd chosen to save Stephanie Reed's life despite the potential consequences to his own employment. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel most risky at the time. Isabella squeezed her son's hand, understanding that his success represented more than individual achievement. Luis's advancement had created opportunities for other people in Pleasant Valley, from Austin Price to the Henderson grandson to future technical college graduates who would find employment through the regional maintenance division. The boy who had learned to fix broken things had discovered his ability to build something entirely new, something that would benefit not just himself, but an entire community of skilled workers seeking opportunities to grow and prosper. 1 year after the accident that changed everything, Luis stood on the newly constructed observation deck overlooking Pleasant Valley Community Lake, watching the autumn sun cast golden reflections across the water where Stephanie Reed's car had once disappeared beneath the surface. The lake looked peaceful now, its tragic memory transformed into something that symbolized renewal and unexpected possibilities. The observation deck itself represented one of the many improvements that had come to Pleasant Valley during the past 12 months. Reed Construction Group's regional expansion had brought prosperity to the small community, creating jobs and opportunities that had reversed decades of economic decline. The town that had once struggled to maintain basic services now hosted ribbon-cutting ceremonies for new businesses and infrastructure projects. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Stephanie said, joining Luis at the deck's railing. She walked without any trace of the limp that had marked her recovery from the accident, her confidence fully restored, along with her physical capabilities. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, sometimes like yesterday. Luis nodded, understanding the temporal distortion that accompanied major life changes. The past year had contained more transformation and growth than the previous decade combined, compressing experiences that might normally unfold over years into a concentrated period of professional and personal evolution. The feasibility study. Results came back yesterday, Stephanie continued, her tone shifting to the business matters that connected them beyond their shared history. The board approved full implementation of the Regional Maintenance Division. Congratulations, you're officially the Director of Reed Construction Regional Services. The promotion represented the culmination of months of careful planning and preparation. Luis had successfully established satellite facilities in Rapid City, and Pierre recruited and trained teams of skilled mechanics and built relationships with construction companies throughout the region. The division was already generating revenue beyond projected targets. Austin's done excellent work managing the Rapid City facility, Luis said, thinking of his former colleague who had embraced the opportunity to advance from individual mechanic to site supervisor. He's got 3 new contracts lined up for next spring, including that highway project near the Wyoming border. Stephanie smiled at Luis's habit of deflecting personal credit toward his team members, a leadership quality that had contributed significantly to the regional division's early success. The ability to develop and motivate subordinates was as important as technical expertise in building sustainable business operations. The board was impressed by your recruitment and training programs, she said. 6 technical college graduates hired in the past 4 months, all of them showing excellent progress under your supervision. You've created a pipeline of skilled workers that will serve the region for decades. Through the observation deck's glass panels, Luis could see Pleasant Valley's main street, where new businesses had opened to serve the expanded workforce that Reed Construction's growth had attracted to the area. The pharmacy where Isabella filled. Her prescriptions now stayed open extended hours to accommodate shift workers. The grocery store had expanded its selection to include items that reflected the community's increased prosperity. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Stephanie said, her expression becoming more serious. Reed Construction Group has been approached by companies in Colorado and Montana about establishing maintenance divisions in their regions. The board is considering a multi-state expansion that would make you vice president of operations for the entire network. The scope of the opportunity was staggering, representing advancement beyond anything Luis had imagined when he first accepted Morrison's mentorship. Vice President of Operations would involve coordinating maintenance services across multiple states, managing hundreds of employees, and making decisions that affected construction projects throughout the Mountain West region. That's a significant step up from what I'm handling now, Luis said carefully, his natural caution asserting itself despite the excitement he felt about the possibilities. It is, Stephanie agreed, but you've demonstrated the strategic thinking and leadership abilities necessary for that level of responsibility. Frank Morrison says you've exceeded his expectations in every aspect of the transition from individual contributor to business executive. The mention of Morrison reminded Luis of how much his mentor's guidance had contributed to his successful career transformation. The older mechanic had announced his retirement plans for the following year, confident that Luis possessed the skills and judgment necessary to carry forward the traditions of excellence that had built Reed Construction's reputation. Dr. Janet Walsh approached along the lakeside walking path, her presence reminding Luis of another transformation that the past year had brought to his family. Isabella's health had stabilized dramatically under the comprehensive treatment plan that Reed Construction's insurance coverage had made possible, allowing mother and son to enjoy their time together without the constant anxiety that had shadowed their relationship for years. Mr. Guerrero, perfect timing, Dr. Walsh called out as she climbed the steps to the observation deck. I just finished reviewing your mother's latest test results. Her heart function has improved to the point where we can reduce her medication dosage and extend the intervals between appointments. The news represented another milestone in Isabella's recovery, confirming that the difficult decisions Luis had made during the past year had created lasting benefits beyond financial security. His mother's improved health was the most meaningful reward of his career transformation. She'll be pleased to hear that, Luis said, thinking of Isabella, who was spending the afternoon volunteering at the community center that Reed Construction had helped fund. His mother's generous nature had flourished as their circumstances improved, allowing her to contribute time and energy to causes that benefited other families in Pleasant Valley. I should mention, Dr. Walsh continued, that the new cardiac treatment program at Sioux Falls General has asked me to recommend patients who might benefit from participating in their research studies. Isabella would be an excellent candidate given her response to current treatments. The research opportunity represented another door opening as a result of improved insurance coverage and medical access. Luis understood that his mother's participation could potentially help other cardiac patients while advancing medical knowledge about heart disease treatment in elderly populations. After Dr. Walsh departed to continue her evening walk, Luis and Stephanie remained on the observation deck as sunset painted the lake in shades of amber and gold. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the dramatic events that had brought them together, but both understood that violence sometimes preceded the most meaningful transformations. I've been thinking about your question regarding the multi-state expansion, Luis said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. I'm interested in exploring the opportunity, but I'd want to maintain my connection to Pleasant Valley and the people who supported me during the transition. Stephanie nodded, having anticipated his concern about staying connected to his roots. The vice president position would be based here, with travel as needed to oversee regional operations. Pleasant Valley would remain your home base, and Isabella would have access to the same medical care that's been so successful. The practical considerations were important, but Luis's connection to Pleasant Valley went deeper than convenience or family obligations. The community had shaped his character and values, providing the foundation that had made his professional success possible. Abandoning those roots would compromise the integrity that had earned him recognition as a leader. "There's something else to consider," Stephanie said, her tone suggesting she'd been planning this conversation carefully. Reed Construction Group is considering establishing a technical training institute here in Pleasant Valley, partnering with the state university system to offer degrees in construction technology and fleet management. The concept immediately captured Luis's imagination, representing an opportunity to create lasting educational infrastructure that would benefit future generations of skilled workers. A technical institute would provide career pathways for young people who might otherwise leave Pleasant Valley, seeking opportunities in larger cities. "You'd be involved in developing the curriculum and selecting faculty," Stephanie continued. "Your experience transitioning from hands-on mechanics to strategic business management would be invaluable in designing programs that prepare students for real-world challenges." Luis could envision the impact such an institute would have on Pleasant Valley and the surrounding region. Students would gain practical skills while contributing to local economic development, creating a positive cycle that would strengthen the community for decades to come. "The board meeting is next week," Stephanie said as they prepared to leave the observation deck. "I'll need your decision about the vice president position by then, along with any conditions or requirements you'd want included in the arrangement." As they walked back toward town, Luis reflected on the journey that had brought him from Barnes Auto Repair to regional business leadership. The transformation had required courage, hard work, and the willingness to embrace opportunities that initially seemed beyond his capabilities. That evening, Luis sat with Isabella on their front porch, sharing the day's developments while watching Pleasant Valley settle into its familiar nighttime routines. The financial pressures that had once dominated their conversations had been replaced by discussions of opportunity and possibility, of dreams that had become achievable through persistence and faith. "Vice President," Isabella mused, her voice carrying the amazement that still accompanied major milestones in their transformed circumstances. "Your father would be so proud to see what you've built from that terrible day at the lake." Luis thought about the moment when he'd chosen to dive into the cold water to save a stranger's life, risking everything he thought he needed for security and stability. The decision had cost him his job at Barnes Auto Repair, but had opened possibilities he'd never imagined. "Sometimes the most important choices are the ones that feel most dangerous at the time," he said, echoing the wisdom that had guided him through the past year's challenges and opportunities. Isabella reached over and squeezed her son's hand, understanding that his success represented more than individual achievement. Luis's advancement had created opportunities throughout Pleasant Valley, from Austin Price's promotion to site supervisor to the technical college graduates who had found career paths through the regional maintenance division. The boy who had learned to fix broken things had discovered his capacity to build something entirely new, something that would benefit not just himself, but an entire community of people seeking opportunities to grow and prosper. The lifetime contract that had emerged from a single act of courage had become a foundation for prosperity that extended far beyond one family's dreams. As autumn stars appeared above Pleasant Valley, Luis understood that some endings were really just better beginnings in disguise, and that the courage to do what seemed right in desperate moments could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities seeking hope and opportunity in an uncertain world. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.